I've mentioned this before, but it needs repeating. Because of the boom of the video store, some flicks were always in tandem for a certain generation and age group. The catalog effect, or the Bowie effect, as I call it, is when you traverse through a body of work by an artist that changes somewhat drastically, or with directors and writers via film. But because you didn't live the passage of time yourself, you can easily judge the work based on merit over hype and anticipation. Time heals, as they say. Now for me it was Predator 1 and 2, Warlock 1 and 2, Ghostbusters 1 and 2, the first two Critters, and of course, both Gremlins. Now before anyone complains in the comments that this isn't horror, Gremlins 1 and 2 have horror elements, with the first leaning far more into them of course, but these movies have always had many different subgenres running through them, and this sequel turns all of them up to 11.
These go to 11?
Yes, it's not fully horror, but it is still present in the sequel, so please, let's just all come together on this and relax. Now, Gremlins 2 isn't hated, though for most of my life it was always kind of looked down upon. You know, lesser than.
Fuck you, blow me.
I find this sequel a fascinating entry, setting up the introspective weirdness that would define a chunk of the 90s. Like I always say, if you partake, pour yourself something nice and smoke 'em if you got 'em. So join me as I explore my love and adoration for my favorite creature and the wackiest sequel of all time, with Gremlins 2, The New Batch. Like the wise and sage Costanza learning the secret to life,
every decision I've ever made in my entire life has been wrong.
Gremlins 2 looked at the original and did the complete opposite. The small town America, with all of its charm and old ways, replaced by the cold, hard city, concrete and innovation. The adventurous, whimsical, and suspiciously dark tone? Now a genre mishmash meta roller coaster cartoon. This is quite telling of our current times and a sad state of affairs when a sequel doing something different is inspected upon like a relic from a far distant time. The 90s. Call me a dog. Only Gremlins 2 didn't do the bare minimum. They made a great second entry that broke the sequel rules, while never truly looking down on itself. Director Joe Dante had no intention on making a follow-up. The first one was a surprise hit and Warner Brothers wanted more fast. So producer Mike Finnell and Dante were tasked with writing a follow-up for a flick that they clearly agreed didn't need it. And after some brainstorming sessions, they both realized that there wasn't a great way to move forward and walked away. Warner Brothers hadn't cracked the code on the Gremlins 2. I mean, they were putting up shit options like Mars and Vegas. Joe Dante has gone on the record saying this about Warner Brothers. They kept working for, as it turned out, several years trying to come up with a sequel for a movie that they really didn't understand in the first place. So it became very difficult for them to duplicate it since they didn't understand why it was successful at all. But Mr. Dante needed a hit, and a deal was made. Joe Dante got creative control and final say, as long as he just amped up the gremlin action and brought back Zach Galligan and Phoebe Cates. Easy. And a move so punk rock he would get a countdown from Lee Ving himself. 1, 2, 3, 4. Dante took the novel approach of going meta, making a sort of anti-sequel. One that would comment on the state of film with cash-in sequels, mock Warner Brothers, while deconstructing and lovingly poking fun at the original. Think Matrix Resurrections, only good.
I'm sure you can understand why our beloved parent company Warner Brothers has decided to make a sequel to the trilogy. They informed me they're going to do it with or without us.
Then maybe just don't make it. Meta's been around, of course, but this type of approach was somewhat unique, and not one you'd expect to infiltrate the second chapter of an adventurous family film. See, the meta subgenre is like found footage. It's an interesting concept that can easily collapse under its own weight, and it always tends to think it's smarter than it actually is. And for every good one, there are triple that shitting the proverbial bed. Gremlins 2 was built from the ground up with the idea of cheap sequels infesting this sequel. You can see a gremlin wearing an anti-Gizmo t-shirt. There's a famous scene where the Clamp security/tech team is ripping on Billy for the ridiculous Mogwai rules. Or the real critic that disliked the original in this actual movie. Both a wink and a playful jab, though I should say I do see Dante giving the middle finger during the rules scene. It's an early jab at the trolls who overthink and take the fun out of everything.
And they cross the time zone. I mean, it's always midnight somewhere.
And of course Hulk Hogan yelling at the Gremlins to put the movie back on. Gremlins 2 didn't invent meta, far from it, but found a way to construct a story around the idea of how dumb the idea of another story is. But here's the good part, it's without the need to be in on the joke. This works because it does the one thing many seem to forget. It doesn't matter what you're preaching, or how smart and wise you think you are. The only thing, the first and only rule that matters, is you must entertain. This takes a bigger is better approach, and though it's clearly being sarcastic, it leads to a style and tone that gives Gremlins 2 a leg to stand on. What I loved about the 80s and early 90s is that movies were made with a focus on this single entity. It wasn't commonplace, though there are outliers of course, to think very far ahead with multiple entries, and how to keep the cash cow moving. But the freedom that Dante got let him experiment in ways that made an honest-to-God unique second entry. Going hard after the original, this starts off by killing Mr. Wing, putting Gizmo into animal testing and gene experimentation. And listen, I know this is the more fun entry, but I think people forget behind the cartoon aesthetic, it's still pretty mean, just in a more colorful way. The great Christopher Lee gets fried. We get more of that classic Gremlins murder, and Kate is nearly killed in an elevator crash, giving us a great gory sequence. And let's not forget, the Gremlins basically crashed the global economy.
We're advising our clients to put everything they've got into canned food and shotguns.
And the story is simple. Billy and Kate have moved to New York to start a new and promising career. We get a gremlin adventure in a skyscraper. I think the bar and theater scene from part 1, only half the movie and a lot crazier. Kinda like the underrated cocaine-fueled Predator 2, which did the location swap the same year. The change in scenery allowed for more experimentation and one hell of a family experience. Gremlins 2 is a charming beast that mocks anything and everything, yet gives us, the audience, the creativity and spirit that every goddamn rehashed sequel was missing.
Where the fuck do you get that stuff?
No, not you, Riggs. We all grew up with you guys, and Donner gave us a journey of a lifetime. There's a reason why that Key & Peele skit felt so right. It really does feel like a kitchen sink approach that somehow worked perfectly.
You talking about a gremlin whose sole purpose in this film is just that he looks stupid as fuck? Yes, it can be in the movie, and it is in the movie.
Now, do I miss the Peltzer family? Of course. Hoyt Axton had a presence that was clearly missed. But this sequel gives us a well-rounded and layered cast sprinkled in. We get Christopher Lee, Robert Picardo, long live Voyager, the great Dick Miller, back as Murray, and that poor guy is shell-shocked from his original encounter.
What was that?
I heard it too.
Of course you heard it too. What does that mean?
Robert Prosky is Grandpa Fred, the depressed Svengoolie knockoff that's over the hill and constantly depressed, and maybe the most relatable character in this movie.
People who watch TV at 3:30 in the morning aren't scared of the Wolfman. Only thing that scares those people is getting sober and finding work.
Zach Galligan and Phoebe Cates wisely return, giving us some hometown heroes to root for. Watching them deal with a building that's so state-of-the-art that it doesn't even work is enjoyable on its own. The corporate jabs here are sharp and brutally honest. If you ever worked for a big corporation, this bullshit jargon will hit close to home.
This is your problem right here. You only see your little part of it. I have to have a complete situational long-term overview outlook perspective. It's as simple as that.
And then there's small things like the fire alarm giving you the history of fire, before you burn alive, which is such a clever addition that most wouldn't even notice.
Fire, the untamed element, oldest of man's mysteries, giver of warmth, destroyer of forests. Right now, this building is on fire.
John Glover steals the show as the mystifying and surprisingly lovable Daniel Clamp. Someone who is clearly the villain, yet Glover plays Clamp with a boyish sense of self. Clamp, as written, comes off as an egotistical asshole, and yeah, he is, but Glover wisely plays against the page and brings an optimism that somehow puts Clamp as a man meaning well. and not the generic evil corporate overlord he could have been. And he's a clear mix between an 80s Trump and Ted Turner. Clamp's book even uses the same font as The Art of the Deal, and Clamp even tears up at his admittedly beautiful end of the world broadcast, poking fun at the one CNN has. And maybe it's the rum talking, but Gremlins 2 has always belonged right next to the original. An entertaining sequel that pokes fun at technology, corporate interests,
Alert personnel, we have a career opportunity in level 7.
and its own legacy. Joe Dante and writer Charlie Haas put together something that took giant swings and landed every one. This ran as fast as it could away from a traditional follow-up, giving us one of the best damn sequels of the 90s. Meta insider commentary aside, at face value, Gremlins 2 personifies an ending of an era, a time and place that can't exist now, where sequels aren't planned ahead, no universe, no streaming spin-off, but one of the last eras where one could make something a little bit strange. Just violent cartoon monsters mocking anything and everything, going funny then gross, and ending in a musical number that goes off the deep end. Well, that's the review. So the next time your boss tries to tie in some new corporate language and conduct, or your sanity starts to crack, realizing social media is basically Clamp's center in app form, turn on all the lights, check all the closets and drawers, look under all the beds, because you never can tell. There just might be a gremlin in your house. Or worse, someone who just doesn't like Gremlins 2. The theatrical run of the first 4 Hellraiser movies will always stand tall, regardless of how you feel about each individual entry. They were strange and unique stories that define the late 80s and early 90s, both darkly bitter yet also a bit sweet, like honey from the bee. But anyway, what if I told you Bloodline is far more of an interesting story than it gets credit for? A more fitting ending than the character has gotten ever since. It's a messy ride, yes, but it's one worth taking. So let's pick your pleasure, rub the box, because this is Hellraiser Bloodline. Screenwriter Peter Atkins, who helped co-write parts 2 and 3, came up with an ambitious story that finally killed off Pinhead. Now, Barker was pretty hands-off for part 3, as the studio got cheap and refused his involvement fee. But wanting a proper cap-off, he came back for part 4 as an executive producer. The issue is that Bloodline was the product of Dimension and of course the Weinsteins. This had the unfortunate luck of having them go back on the script they themselves had already greenlit, and give director and special effects extraordinaire Kevin Yeager enough of a headache during and after production that he quit and took his name off the movie. The draft Yeager turned in was 111 minutes, and the one that we got was 82. So yeah, shit went down. Hellraiser Bloodline is the 4th and final film in the original lineup. It's the last to hit theaters before the long and brutal winter of straight-to-DVD sequels. You know, where Pinhead played more of a Rod Serling character. I think The Twilight Zone, only produced by the Asylum. Bloodline's entire purpose is meant to be the true ending that tied up the ever-growing saga in a poignant way. But before it came Hellraiser 3, it was the series' misguided attempt at trying to turn Pinhead into the next Freddy, with him taking on more of a prominent role, way more dialogue, and some neat action, if not a bit out of character for the series.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Now, I do have a soft spot for part 3, but the schlock and fun that we got just wasn't quite right for this dark and sexual series. You see, the scope and Bloodline is what's always impressed me, taking place in 3 different timelines, 1796, 1996, and 2127. And with each generation a swing and a miss in terms of taking down the Hell Priest. But with each miss, the bloodline of the Toymaker evolves. Merchant learns and grows. Bloodline acts as a prequel to the original and a sequel to part 3. And even with the low critical and fan response of parts 3 and 4, I gotta be honest, there is a charm to the convoluted way the 80s horror icons contained their stories, regardless of the writer and director. And nowadays they reboot, remake, they just change shit. But back then you always had to start where the last guy left off. And it's something I always just kind of found creative. Simpler times, really. But in this sequel, we get to see the plight of one man's ancestry trying to defeat the Hell Priest and Cenobites once and for all.
Hell is what I'm going to catch, and I'm gonna burn it away in a blaze of light.
We get to learn about the creation of the original box and its creator, Philippe Le Merchant.
Finest toy maker in France.
Or Merchant later on.
John Merchant.
We come to understand the original good nature intent of the box, and how it was commissioned from a devil-worshipping aristocrat.
As precise as your pieces.
Hellraiser Bloodline gets back to the basics. It shifts the focus away from Pinhead, which is the right move. Or, the best it can with the Weinsteins f***ing with the chronological order of things. And Merchant, played by Bruce Ramsey, and Angelique, played by the stunning Valentina Vargas, are far more interesting characters to follow. Now listen, I love Paul Marshall and will always be Team Warlock too. I mean, let's be honest, Julian Sands is a king. But Bloodline paints a more interesting journey with these two. Regardless of studio interference, these are better characters to follow. Angelique serves as our demon foe, and she gets enough screen time as our hero does, making this story equally hers. And honestly, this is the change the series needed. And it's a nice turn of events following the villain and hero on somewhat equal footing. And unlike Julia, Angelique is at a disadvantage, with Merchant almost a predator without being aware he is one. We see her struggles and proverbial dick measuring with Pinhead. She's more fleshed out as a demon looking to replace her superior. Her relationship with Pinhead is more distrusting and aggressive, yet flirty with a bit of sexual tension.
You look like death, princess.
And again, a departure from the Cenobite's servant-like behavior that's come before. We jump around 300 years with Angelique trying to stop Merchant's bloodline from creating an alternate box. A box to negate the powers of the original, and close the door between the worlds for good. And to be honest, of all the ways Pinhead and the Cenobites have been stopped, the idea of a good box, a box of light, is a clever way to play itself. A box of light to defeat the box of darkness. This expansion of the original mythology complements what's come before, and without delving too deep or dumbing it down. The 90s were infamous for over-explaining our 80s horror icons. But Bloodline never gives us any real answers, besides the creation of the box. The bigger story threads are still kept vague enough to mystify and entertain. You can give this movie as much crap as you want, but it doesn't over-explain. And the idea of a new box being the only salvation is smart, honestly. We were brought into the Hellraiser universe with a box, and it's a box, which will be our only way out. Having each male in Merchant's bloodline being drawn to the creation of the box is a cool story beat that finds a way to keep itself fresh with the time jumps into different eras. Bloodline gets a hard time. One, because it's clearly cut to pieces. But more than that, because it ends up in space. And that's where we as a society have decided that horror franchises go to die. But Bloodline uses the space setting to further the story and has meaning behind it. It's not futuristic for the sake of it.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, of course not.
We end up in space because it's taken this long for Merchant's bloodline to find the technology it needs to create the box. It's the journey discovery that leads to the destination in 2127. The setting directly ties to the crucial information in the story, setup and payoff. But honestly, I think my biggest issue with the space setting is that they should have designed the space base in a way that didn't give away the twist of it being the box itself. Even the script describes it this way, so I guess I can't really complain, but I think designing it differently so you didn't know right away would have been a better way to punctuate the ending. And though it's a short, pieced-together movie, trapping Pinhead in a box, completing the centuries-long battle, is a fitting ending, and one that doesn't feel cheap or forced. It ends the saga in a satisfying and conclusive way, and it feels right.
What have you done?
I have faith in the life Endgame demon.
Regardless of how long the series continued on after this, Bloodline has the right ending for you to tip your hat, acknowledge the closure, and walk away. Flaws in production aside, Part 4 came out swinging, ditching the Earth-made Cenobites who sported camcorders, CDs, and cocktail shakers, and gave us the melded security twins, whose fatality kill is fantastic. Angelique with her nun dressed like flayed flesh. And side note real quick, I really wish we could have got to see the aristocrat Cenobites and the clown Cenobites. That'd have been so cool. And then there's the Hell Dog, or Wolf. I don't know, I'm not exactly sure. But Pinhead has this pet wolf dog called the Cheddar Beast. And it means, one of two things. Either hell is some kind of evolutionary design, or all dogs don't go to heaven.
Oh, come on. Why would you think that's funny?
No. I looked it up later in life, so I know it's a man formed into a dog-like shape. Probably a kink of some kind. And listen, I ain't here to shame. Dig what you dig, dude. Life is short. There's a lot going for Bloodline if only one can see past the interference. And listen, I get why it's unpopular. Like the assembly cut of Alien 3, you would need to look upon it from afar, see the intentions, what was eventually left in, and its overall purpose. It's not a movie for casual fans, I get it, but if you care about the series and are into this world, this movie works. Even as screwed as Bloodline was from the moment the budget cuts hit, there was a great story here, filled with one of the series' best villains, even if I wish Vargas's voice was left in. Though I gotta give some props because it's actually great ADR.
Then I would like your permission to go by myself.
Then I would like your permission to go by myself.
Bloodline is a flawed but fitting end, and one that, if left intact, could have been the best sequel we got. Now, if interested, Atkins actually recently put out his original screenplay, showing the original vision he had. And I'm sure someone's saying, who would buy the original Hellraiser Bloodline script?
Me. I would.
And they should have been included in the great Scarlet box set. And according to IMDb, I just found out that it was supposed to be. But Arrow declined since it was an unpopular entry. Like, wait, what? Bitch, you're Arrow Films, not Criterion. You put out schlocky movies. This is the point, man. Step up. So next time you want to give this entry a hard time, do me a favor and give it one more go. It's better than you remember if you are willing to look. To be completely honest, I'm not the biggest proponent of the fantasy genre. Yet, when you mix it with horror, well, now you're speaking my language. Like vodka and Red Bull. Separate, but together. Woo! The 90s had a small cult series that some may even remember, and for this video, I hope you do. One that dealt with magic, witchcraft, and the consequences that accompany it. A series that made Julian Sands the quintessential 90s pompous English bad guy. You had the great and very young Richard E. Grant stealing scenes with his faux Scottish accent.
Yesterday, you cared not to know such things.
Yesterday was 20 years ago.
Yet it was Mr. Sands who really stood tall as the inquisitive and dangerous witch. It's a childhood favorite, and though dated, especially in the digital effects department, but hey, what isn't? It is still a hell of a great watch today. Now with, 2 movies. Yes, 2 movies in the series. My favorite lies in its sort of wacky and darker action-packed sequel. So for this episode of The Black Sheep, let's go back to the early 90s and defend one of the best cult sequels with Warlock, the Armageddon, which I will be referring to as Warlock 2 because I'm not going to say that entire name every time. Now, if you haven't seen part 2, let me sell you the pitch. A high-class Englishman plays a 17th century warlock whom, as Satan's son, wants to bring his father to Earth. To do so, he must collect a bunch of magical stones spread across the good old US of A. Now, the only problem is a secret sect of druid warriors, led by the f***ing captain himself.
I don't give a fuck, Riggs.
Captain!
Time was when this sort of thing would send me right over the fucking falls. I swear to God, I'm getting old.
And 2 dorky teens must learn to master their, Jedi powers in order to defeat the Warlock and save existence. Bearing no relation to the first except that Mr. Sands is playing a Warlock, working in conjunction with the devil. It could be the same one, technically just reborn, but Sands plays this one with a bit more grit, so I don't know.
Can I help you, sir?
Shut up.
It's the early 90s, and a woman wearing one of the stones becomes instantly pregnant when the rare lunar eclipse connects with it, or something like that. The Warlock ain't wearing the same olden garb either. I gotta give it to Julian Sands. The man goes method. Now, so he takes the clothes right off of Billy Peltzer's back, Terminator 2 style. Of course, it's directed by the great Anthony Hickox, who also did the underrated duo of Waxwork 1 and 2. From here, the story splits in 2. We have our villain on a road trip from New York to California, collecting all the stones in order to bring his father, the Prince of Darkness, back home. While two teens, Kenny and Samantha, played by Chris Young and Paula Marshall, must accept their birthright of being druid warriors to take the final stand and stop the Warlock before it's too late. I actually really dig the druid teen plot point, though no one here is matching the screen presence of Richard E. Grant, of course, and honestly that would be my biggest complaint. The Luke Skywalker-esque arc is a fun addition, and it differentiates this sequel from the first. And it's not that Kenny and Sam just need to learn their powers as Skywalker did. No, they each need to fucking die to even start. And a scene that so holds up for being weird and creepy is when Will Travis, aka the Captain, and his buddy Franks, played by the badass that is R.G. Armstrong, go looking for Kenny to fix him up for his battle with the witch, leading to this stylized and epic shot.
I love you, Kenny.
Wide-eyed and full of life, Warlock 2 can be cheesy, but the dated charm and optimism of innocence makes this both a relic and somehow timeless.
It's a world of magic, son, where nothing is what it seems to be.
Having our pretty boy Warlock just go on an episodic adventure, tricking folks into giving him the stones, with a guaranteed gruesome end. Yeah, it feels very specific for its time, yet packs a big enough punch where it's damn near punk rock compared to the studio fare we get today. When the Warlock's map, which is the skin burned off his mortal mother, becomes dry, in what is a great nod to Sam Raimi and Cronenberg, he must moisturize it with blood, leading to a funny and gory scene that could not exist today.
How does it look?
On the other end, the hero's journey is where that 90s optimism comes into play. I love how much more fantasy-driven this entry is, without sacrificing the horror element. Warlock 2 fits the whimsical horror mold far greater than its predecessor. While the first dealt more with the magic aspect of the Warlock, something this entry is sorely missing, Part 2 does have more of that magical aura to it. The healing potion comes with magical sparkles.
We may not be able to fight, but we can still heal.
While Kenny's dad Will uses his force-like powers to fend off some school bullies. It is something that is both melodramatic and fantastic at the same time. We get something cheesy like this.
I didn't ask you to shoot me.
Like the phoenix rising from the ashes, the warrior rises from his own death. That's the way it's written.
And something badass like this.
Happy trails, partners.
This conflict between the Druid warriors and the Warlock boasts not only some impressive practical effects, but makes for a logistically interesting fight. He blows up the underground bunker with him inside just to try and kill Kenny. A quick battle in the town square at high noon then turns into a bloody beatdown in the forest. Now, yeah, the computer effects don't hold up, and since I was a kid when I first saw this, I can't argue that they looked great then. But it was the Wild West for low-budget visual effects in the early 90s. But Anthony Hitchcock's working within his limitations with a new technology. Good, try something new to enhance the tale that's being told. Okay, the ADR may be the one thing I can't forgive.
So much for my 70th birthday. It's roughly less So much for my 70th birthday.
And poor Kenny's dialogue was just completely changed. Whatever he's saying, it wasn't this.
I'll go get the hose.
The character of the Warlock was one of cunning sophistication, mixed with a vicious streak that made him an underrated villain that could have stood next to some of the greats. The Warlock movies had their own logic and style, and Part 2 expands the world. Yeah, I'm reaching a bit, but just go with me. Mixing in more Western and fantasy, the sequel gave it more of a unique identity. And if they ever made a third, I would have hoped they would have added in a new genre to play around in. And of course, Julian Sands is everything here. And the funhouse scene plays out like a bad trip. Warlock 2, or Warlock the Armageddon, whatever you want to call it, took the story in a new and exciting direction. Inventive deaths, a script that didn't reserve itself to ride the coattails of its predecessor, and a standout performance by Julian Sands makes this sequel ripe for the status of a true cult classic. I sat through the commentary by Anthony Hickox recently, and he seems to regret this decision or that decision. Wished he did this different or that another way. But listen, I get it. But Hickox rocked this out and gave us a wild adventure full of blood, trippy visuals, and some of that English sass.
Sorry, it's not for sale. I never said anything about buying it.
Once you make something and it finds an audience, it's no longer yours. The collective we get to enjoy it, love it, and find a connection with it. Once your art finds an audience, then it's your job to support it and embrace what people love about it. Regardless if you think you could have done a better job now, no one gives a shit. In that moment in time when they watched it, it caused a sense of joy and attachment. It's the magic of movies. Perfection bores me. I'm here for heart. If I made a movie right now, I couldn't do anything close to the quality of Warlock 2. Anthony Hickox, dude, you did a great job. You gave us a sequel centered around a murderous road trip with a male witch and a 90s haircut, 2 teens with Jedi powers, the one and only captain, and a cruel villain with a level of presence and class that could only come from the excellent Julian Sands.
Is this the best you can do?
I think it is. I think it is.